I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you to wrap up UTSA football's week one game at Texas A&M. Greg, the Roadrunners with a pretty good showing in College Station. Uh, Score a few touchdowns, give UTSA fans something to cheer about. But in the end, the Aggies outlast the Roadrunners. Greg, following the game, Jeff Traylor said his team had championship fiber. He was proud of the way they played. What were some of your big picture takeaways from week one?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit better than I expected. They got a couple more stops than I would have thought that they would be able to get just with the defense. We hadn't seen a lot of guys against a team that's in the top 25 and has a lot of talent, obviously, on that end. And I thought, especially along the line of scrimmages, I think they held up a lot better than I would have thought on offense and defense. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of reasons to be encouraged. And obviously, you come away with some areas that a lot of the same stuff we were flagging before the year that we're still not sure exactly how they're going to thrive in some of these positions. And that has to be worked out going forward. But generally, I would say, yeah, it's a lot of reason to be encouraged.
Yep, I agree across the board there. Let's start with the offensive play. My biggest surprise, and I think I noted it in the second quarter, was how efficient the run game was. Robert Henry had a huge game, the two touchdown runs, the long 75-yard house call. But even before that play in the third quarter, he was getting able, UTSA was able to open up some lanes. I guess credit to the offensive line, the tight ends, two new starters along the offensive line as a unit, their grades weren't super great, but individually looked like they did enough to to have that production. And let's give credit to Robert Henry, a guy that was kind of banged up at the end of last year and continues to produce for the Roadrunners.
Yeah, obviously Robert Henry had an awesome game, and I think there was some plenty of good blocking. There was some good play calling that put him in good positions. They had some success on these like third and long draw plays where he was able to get some pretty good chunks that turned into a fresh set of downs and more opportunities for him to keep getting into a little bit of a rhythm. And then I actually thought Will Henderson showed really well too in
Yeah.
his opportunities. There were some times where he was a little bit more physical as a runner than I would have thought, just based on sort of what we know about him and what we'd seen previously and how they kind of liked to use him last year. So I think the backs did their part, and obviously the offensive line has to play a big role in that. And there were times where, Robert Henry felt like he was kind of bottled up and he found a way out of there. And there was some good individual efforts on his part. But I do think that the offensive line did a pretty good job of sort of creating some opportunities and generating some push and just sort of holding up probably better than I would have thought, just given the talent disparity and the level of athletes that they're up against. So, there was a couple, when you mentioned the new guys, I thought that there were maybe a couple of breakdowns on the
Yeah.
interior. And there was one or two times that I thought Jalen Garth got beat a little bit just from a speed perspective around the right edge at right tackle there. But other than that, I mean, it's better than you would have thought. Like you're going to have that happen in a given week for even some of the best offensive lines. And so for those guys to hold up as well as they did, I think it's really promising showing going forward. We'll see. The only thing was I think at center, we thought it was sort of a close battle between Ben
Yeah.
Rios and Luke Lopez. And there were a couple of times I saw Rios was just beating himself up over kind of not getting to the guy he wanted to get to or letting somebody through uncontested. And so I don't know how harshly they graded him internally. Maybe they'll look at that spot going forward. But other if they stick with these five guys, as long as they want to and as long as they need to, because we'll see if Venli Tatafu and Corey Godinet are going to come back anytime soon and how that impacts the rotation there. But this is a solid unit if they want to stick with this five.
Yeah, it did seem like it was close, right? They were doing some stuff in pregame that made you think any one of those combination of starting offensive linemen could see the field in week one. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes looking forward. I'm sure we'll get into this week, but man, Robert Henry just kind of looked a little bit different, if you ask me. I mean, I don't remember him being such a physical back, and I don't know if he's got another gear of speed, but after the game, we learned he's kind of matured a little bit off the field. And is that something you're looking to learn and write on a little bit more this week?
Well, it's just always been impressive that he was so hard to tackle. I mean, he was a
Right.
guy that, like, he didn't, maybe he's a little bit bigger now, but he was never easy to bring down. It felt like he was fighting for the last yard every play and took two or three guys to sort of drag him down by grabbing on whatever they could grab onto to get a hold of him. Where he plays with the style that's maybe even bigger than his weight, and now his weight is kind of picked up a little bit to match
Yeah.
potentially. He looks like he's carrying a couple extra pounds. So yeah, it's just interesting to hear about how it seems like his motivation has been picked up a little bit just because of having a son, and it's that was funny they were joking about just how that's kind of messed with his schedule, but it's something that seems like it's inspiring him to go to an even higher level and potentially continue to pursue the NFL opportunity should that come for him at the end of the year. And just another reminder that having this JUCO waiver has sort of changed things for a lot of guys, but particularly for him at that position with UTSA, he's going to be a big impact this year.
What did you think about the offensive play as a whole? Jeff Traylor mentioned it. I think it was kind of the big turning point after UTSA's big touchdown run in the third quarter. They cut it to 21-17. I think there was six straight punts where the Roadrunners simply couldn't get anything going. Um, I felt like Owen McCown wasn't as sharp as he normally was. I did not realize the wind was such a huge factor in the game. We're kind of tucked away 100 feet in the air, and in the press box, and I had connectivities with the internet issues for the first quarter and a half of the game, so I wasn't able to watch the replays or much of the broadcast. But what was your takeaway? Yeah, obviously a lot of screens. Jeff Traylor said that was by design. They were worried about protection issues. You think there was anything UTSA could have done better against Texas A&M?
Yeah, we talked about the run game quite a bit, but in the passing game, I I thought watching it live, Owen didn't look super comfortable. But then when I watched it back on television, it was not maybe as bad or as out of sorts as I thought
Yeah,
in the
same.
showing. And there were some times where he looked like he got some things going in the RPO game and hit a couple slants, but generally he didn't feel like he got to make a ton of decisions or that a ton
Right.
was put on him, just the way they sort of called the game. So some of these screens didn't connect and things like that. And he even mentioned after the game they were just kind of handing it off so much he wasn't necessarily in a huge rhythm as a passer just because they had the run game going. And obviously you can't fault them for that because they moved the ball on the ground at a pretty high level. But there was only maybe one or two plays where he felt like he really had to kind of read the field and make a decision. And there was the one that should have been intercepted. I think that was in the third quarter, maybe second quarter.
Yep.
I just remember that play. There was like he tried to throw it to, I think it was Houston Thomas, kind of in like a corner to the right,
Yeah.
and there was two guys who had a shot at it, and it hit one of the defenders in the hand. So he easily could have come away with an interception there. I think that was right before halftime. And other than that, there were not a ton of like turnover worthy plays from my view of it. I don't actually know what the stat is on that, but it seemed like he took care of the ball pretty well. And um, again, the accuracy, I just don't think it was as pinpoint as usual, but maybe that is part of the win too. And it seemed like at times he felt more pressure than actually existed. But then again, I didn't see that when I watched it back as much as I felt like I saw it live. So I wouldn't, panic about it. Certainly he had an opportunity to sort of come out and establish himself as one of the top quarterbacks in the group of five and sort of make a case that he's the guy and this is his year and all that. And it was just more of a pedestrian kind of showing, but I don't think it's anything to be concerned about going forward.
Yep, let's jump to the defensive side of things. Another kind of shocker on my end is how, for the most part, UTSA's defense shut down Texas A&M's rushing game, right? For a long majority of that game. I mean, it was a dominant performance almost, and eventually the physicality and the speed of what Texas A&M had, I think, wore UTSA down, but uh a generally pretty solid defensive performance, I feel like.
Yeah, I think calling it dominant might be a little bit aggressive,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I do think that they held their own pretty well, especially considering that Texas A&M's offensive line is considered maybe the strength of the team, maybe one of the strongest offensive lines in college football. I sort of thought that they'd have an easier time of just generating some push up front and establishing that running game at a higher level. But UTSA's defensive line, we talked about how there's so many new names, but they always seem to find guys who can contribute, and they did a pretty good job of holding up against the run. I was sort of interested to see what they could do in terms of the attacking and creating pressure. Like every time Johnny Bones was out there, I was trying to watch him, and then he was just like in containment. Like they did a lot of
Yeah.
stuff, but they just didn't want to get beat by Marcel Reed. So I don't know that we got a great look at a lot of those guys, but we saw what at least in terms of rushing the passer and kind of making havoc plays, and that's why UTSA finished with I think no sacks and no takeaways. But they did a good job of what they were asked to do, which is sort of containing the running lanes and keeping Texas A&M from being able to grind it out on the ground where you just don't want to let them run for 8 yards a carry and beat you that way. That's just too easy. So they made them work for it a little bit through the passing game, and obviously they had a lot of success there overall. But for UTSA to force punts on back-to-back drives to open the game, I wasn't sure if they'd force two punts in the game just because
Yeah.
we just hadn't seen these guys, and they got a lot of stops really. So I think that there's a lot to be encouraged about in the defense. There's spots. We were worried about will linebacker and cornerback, and I don't think we're any less worried about those necessarily. That's still going to be a concern going forward, but everywhere else, I thought the safeties with Jimmy Wyrick and Ty Milton, even with Jamarius Lewis out, it seemed like those guys kind of flew around and made some plays. And Shad Banks lived up to the billing as a guy who's going to be
Yeah,
sort of the centerpiece of that defense and is going to be able to make some, be where he needs to be to make the tackles and deliver some hits. And Kendrick Blackshire maybe had one or two times where it felt
yeah.
like he was not necessarily in the right spot, but he was certainly around the ball enough to rack up some tackles. I heard his name called quite a bit, especially when they were pronouncing it wrong for the first half of the game. So I do think that a lot of those guys that we expected to, or at least that UTSA needed to step up for this defense to be competent, sort of delivered on that. And then there's the other spots where we'll just sort of see what they do there or how those guys develop. So,
Yeah,
uh, but overall, above expectations. Yeah.
yeah, I think the glaring negative coming out of this game, right? And it's hard to really, put because of the opponent, right? But they weren't able to generate much pass rush. And I mean, you look at can't we learn today that Cam Cooper is gonna be out for the season, and you have to ask where is that pass rush gonna come from, right? It seemed like it was gonna be him and maybe Vic Shaw, and now it may be squarely placed on Vic Shaw's shoulders. A pretty huge loss, a single digit guy on defense break.
Yeah, we'll have to see if Don Munnerlin can contribute to that too, but it does look like you're going to get a lot of Vic Shaw. And then if Nana Nanu comes back, I guess it's just a bonus at this point. It seemed like they were more optimistic about it at certain points along this process than Jeff's made it sound today. So he could just be kind of slow playing that, but it does seem like that guy that Nana's not particularly close to being able to contribute, especially at a high level there for a ton of snaps. So it's probably going to be down to Vic Shaw and Don just to see what they can do there. And
Yeah.
they can always scheme up ways to try to get to the passer, but they did not have to do that previously. It was a little bit more natural for a guy to just kind of just go off the edge, and then they can free up a lot of other things on the defense where they don't have to commit those resources to trying to generate that pass rush. So I think we'll see if one of those guys can step up. Um, but certainly it's sort of alarming early on that Cam's already out of the mix. I mean, if you have another injury there, then you have to start talking about moving guys from other positions, and it gets dicey in a hurry. So yeah, that's going to be a red flag going forward, just kind of like we thought it was going to be. But I don't want to grade them too harshly just because, again, like we talked about a minute ago, they weren't super committed to trying to rush the passer.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it felt like those guys might not have even been asked to get to the quarterback as much as just to make sure he doesn't break containment. So, you don't want to grade them too harshly for not getting home if they weren't trying to get home with that much force. So we'll see against a different opponent. If against Texas State this week, it's a different story.
What is your takeaway from the pass coverage? It feels like that's going to be an issue going forward. But again, I mean, you're talking about one of the fastest players UTSA's maybe ever faced, and what they saw against Texas A&M, and I think that was a huge factor in what we saw in week one.
Yeah, really two of those guys with
Yeah,
Frazier and Concepcion too. So um yeah, we knew that that was going to be a point that we'd have to look at in terms of who at corner is even going to start, much less if they can play at a high level. And it's always hard to tell just from watching it on TV after, but it did seem like they wanted to play a lot of zone, which makes sense because I doubt when you put A&M up on the whiteboard that there's a ton of matchups that you feel awesome about. So it seems reasonable that you would want to avoid these one-on-one situations. And there were a few times where it seemed like a guy might have been in position to make a play, but the angles are just different when you have guys with that level of speed and you're maybe taking some risks here and there with other parts of the defense, and then it ends up being a one-on-one situation and you take a bad angle and then the guy takes the screen pass to the house. So I think that you don't want to grade him too harshly just because the matchup was so tough, but certainly we didn't see much to be more confident in. I mean, Devin Meyer and KK Martin, or Devin Martin and KK Meyer. I got those
yeah.
reversed. Those are the those were the two starters in this game, and that was what we expected. And they both had their moments, I thought, where they didn't necessarily show up a ton as kind of having breakdowns. There were a couple times where a guy was running wide open, and actually they got away with both of those, the two
Yeah.
biggest busts of the game. So yeah, I think it's just going to be something that we knew it was going to be an issue, and it still hasn't fully been resolved. But at least we have a little bit of a better sense of who the guys are. I think they really only played three corners,
Yeah.
essentially, because Jacavian Rogers, I almost called him Jacavian Martin. We're just going to mix up everybody's name, but yeah, Jacavian Rogers was the third guy. So it was the names that we expected, but we just didn't see anything too outstanding or too alarming. It's just going to have to be something we'll still be evaluating, I think.
Yep. Let's turn to I guess the thing that's going to keep Jeff Traylor up the most at night. Special teams. I think he called it a disaster or something similar to that this morning. Not great. Uh, I think the win probably played a factor on maybe the one of the kickoffs or something, but just they need they're looking for they're searching for answers on special teams, and I think that was maybe the difference in the game.
Yeah, there were a lot of differences in the game when it came down to it fully, but I do think that that was certainly something that was problematic. And it was one we expected coming in, where Trailer said during the week that they just have more athletes, bigger, stronger, faster guys. And so, especially you take some of the freshmen and sophomores who aren't necessarily ready to play in these position roles yet, but they're able to step in on special teams and give them an athletic boost there that there's just a gap between what they do on special teams and what UTSA can do on special teams. But there were certain parts of that that even within that disadvantage, I think were alarming. And I was just based on hearing Trailer talk about it, I wasn't sure if he would just kind of write it off as a tough matchup for the special teams guys, but the punt especially, I think a lot of it came down to the punt part of the punt rather than exactly the coverage part. You know, the one that they returned for the touchdown was a low line drive kick that was right to him, and you just give him that kind of a runway, and that's going to happen. And not everybody will punish you as hard as Concepcion did, but I think that there's going to be a lot of times where if you're going to hit that kind of a punt, that there's going to be something bad that happens after that. So you don't want to grade the coverage teams too harshly when there were maybe some things that were sort of suboptimal or out of their control, but certainly there wasn't too many promising signs there. So I think it's something that if Jeff Traylor says he's looking at it, then I think it's something that's obviously a concern. So it's hard to know what you can even do about that. I mean, you can try some different guys if you want to, but you've been working on it through camp, and it's something that you're not working a ton of special team periods during the week where maybe you can change over a bunch of
Yeah.
personnel and have it make the kind of result that you want. So we'll see what they do there and how it looks against a team that's not as athletic. I think there's going to be plenty of times this year where they can get away with it too,
Yeah.
where yes, it might be an issue, but they're not going to feel it the same way they felt it in this game.
The Roadrunners going to Kyle Field, Greg, 107,000 and some change. Pretty awesome environment there, just to quite frankly that it was and I think UTSA handled it as well as they could have, right? The Roadrunners had a solid contingent of supporters in the corner there of the end zone, and there were times the stadium was rocking, literally shaking,
Yeah.
and UTSA answered a few times, right? And for a program that's played in these environments that they haven't done so well against Texas and Tennessee recently, I thought it was a good, stepping stone and measuring stick. That obviously they're not happy with the result, but the way the season is laid out in front of them, they could use this to kind of as a stepping stone for a good season.
Yeah, I mean, we spent the whole offseason talking about discipline and how they want to be more buttoned up, and then to play in front of the biggest crowd that the program has ever seen and have zero pre-snap penalties. And not just that, you expect to see some of that in the first game of the year regardless. But the
Yeah.
first game of the year in an environment like that, when it was something that was already kind of a red flag coming away from that season, to have all that working against you and to play as clean as they played, I thought was really, really impressive. So I think from that perspective, that was something that if they lost, 52-3, that was still something that I think you could look for as sort of a bright spot of saying, their biggest goal was to be a little bit more buttoned up and clean with some of these things, and they did it. And the discipline seemed like it was not an issue. So to have that happen along with a little bit more competitive score and overall game flow than you expected, I think is another just add it to the list of things that they come away from this feeling positive about. And it all leads to that kind of championship fiber thing, which I think I buy into at this point.
Yep, I tend to agree with that, Greg. The Roadrunners face rival Texas State this week, one of the bigger games on the calendar. Texas State had a 600-yard offensive explosion in week one. They got a brand new quarterback who looks pretty good. I think we're in store for a fun one this Saturday at the Alamo Dome.
Yeah, I mean, the most interesting thing to me is just kind of how last year's game factors in and what that does
Mhm.
in terms of kind of a motivator or, if Texas State jumps out early, is that sort of something that's discouraging? Like, did these guys suddenly feel like the other team has their number with the new way of doing things in the current staffs as they're built right now? So I sort of doubt that there's going to be any panic from either side depending how the game starts out. But it's just such an interesting dynamic because it was always like UTSA was in control, having won every matchup in the series, and then Texas State flipped it so violently last year that now a lot of those guys, especially on the offensive side for UTSA being back and having experienced that, just how does that sort of motivate them or drive them this week? Do they think of it as a rivalry the same way the fans do? So you'll see some of that. We'll see what that energy looks like when they get out on the field.
the home opener. I know UTSA is trying to break their home attendance record. We'll see how that goes. I think they'll get close. We'll see.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's ambitious, but at least the week one was a little bit encouraging, and I haven't really gauged the reaction from Texas State, but I imagine they're feeling pretty good after the kind of offensive performance they had. So maybe there's a few people who were on the fence who might get pushed over to go for it. Generally, I think compared to last year at this time, I think both of these teams had a little bit more hype around them in terms of their ability to. They were both probably looking at themselves as possible playoff contenders, and I don't know that that conversation is the same this year. So last year might have been the year to try to hit that mark, but this is the year that there's a home game, so they're gonna give it a shot. And they even when what was it like they drew 40 something when
yeah,
maybe the energy level
2 years ago.
was about where it is now. So with the new sort of effort and push behind it that they've been thinking about this for months, maybe they are going to be able to get close to that. So it'll depend how bad they want to. There's always
Yeah.
a way to get people in the building.
We'll see. The upper level is open. Tickets are available. So if anybody's interested on the fence, go ahead and check that out. Greg, I think that'll wrap up week one. Football season's here. Where every week we'll see how the Roadrunners try to bounce back from a tough loss, but I think they got us feel in a positive mood overall.
Yeah, I think everything is starting out on the right foot for them. So it's going to be tough because the league looks really strong. I mean, for
Yeah.
USF to go beat Boise State the way that they did, and Boise State was considered the top team in the group of five. So now you can put USF right in that conversation of the league contenders where
Yep.
maybe coming into the year they might have been a notch below. And Memphis looked fine. I think Army looked fine.
Tulane.
Tulane, yeah, Tulane's probably the new number one in the group of five in terms of if you're kind of looking at the rankings and the hierarchy and who you expect to make the playoffs. For them to beat Northwestern at home
Yep.
and the way Jake Retzlaff looked is really impressive. So I guess Army kind of dropped out of the ranks of
Yep.
contenders
I,
based on their week one showing, and that can change really quickly. But in terms of just the strength of the league, basically the teams that UTSA thought they might be competing with, four of them had really good weeks and one of them had a bad week. So the field is only getting tougher from
yep.
sort of the outside perspective.
A lot of football still left to be played. So we'll see. I think that'll wrap it up, Greg. We'll see you guys down at the Alamo Dome on Saturday. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.